Hi everyone, how are we doing? So what I'd like to do is now put the aggregate supply and aggregate demand curve model and the employment market together into two graphs next to each other. So on the left hand side we have the employment market. We have wages on the vertical axis, employment on the horizontal axis. And what we have is the labor demand schedule, and I realize this is not there, labor demand and labor supply, and they intersect at point E. And at point E, we have an equilibrium wage rate W0, and then an employment level Ln. Now what we're doing is, we've talked about this a little bit before, we're going to divide up employment into employment to equal the natural level of employment and the cyclical component of employment. And the natural level of employment is the long-run equilibrium level of employment, or, which is not written down here, but you guys can write this down, it's the level of employment that would be forthcoming if the economy fully adjusts to all economic shocks. Okay? So this is a long-run concept in the sense that we understand that the economy is now at a resting point. Okay, so, but I will explain this more later on, and then also employment is going to equal the natural level of employment plus the cyclical component of employment, and that represents all short-run shocks, which we'll be spending a lot more time on in the future lectures. Okay, then we have the output market. And the output market is the intersection of all three curves at point E. So this point E actually provides the same information as this point E. And so this is long-run equilibrium, and also in long-run equilibrium, output is at the natural level of employment, Yn, and the cyclical component of output is any difference. But for right now, in long-run equilibrium, okay, we have LC to equal YC to equal 0. In other words, there's no cyclical component of output and no cyclical component of employment. But again, we will be enriching the model to look at those deviations away from the natural rate. So, what we have here is the combination of the two graphs allows us to calculate the real wage. W0 is the nominal wage obtained in the employment market, and P0 is the price level, the equilibrium price level in the output market, and then we have W0 over P0 is the real wage in long-run equilibrium. And what we're concerned with is how these things adjust when there's economic shocks. Now also, with this price level P0, there is some associated expected price level PE. And what we're going to demonstrate is that when monetary policy, let's say, causes an increase in the money supply, we're going to see prices rise, and we'll also see the expected price level rise, but we're going to do that in the next lecture. So, this gives us a snapshot of where we're starting with. In all models from now on, we'll always start out in long-run equilibrium, and then we're going to shock the model, and some curves will shift and we'll move out of long-run equilibrium, and then we'll figure out how the model adjusts to these changes. So again, here is a snapshot of our overall model. Now, the next lecture, I'm going to start with this same graph, but I'm going to have curves drawn when we shock the system, and what we're going to have is an increase in money supply load up here, actually, in this part of the board. So, okay, so what I'd like you to do is we'll say goodbye, and then the next lecture is going to be when we actually have an increase in money supply, which is going to start to shift some of these curves. Okay, see you in a little bit.